The causes of World War One. Hello, discoverers. Welcome back to another informative video presented to you by the Explorer, and thanks for watching. There are several conspiracy theories of a Cold War or the imminence of World War III around the corner, but if we can draw lessons from the past, then we will be able to see if there is any truth to these theories or not. Therefore, we shall go down the memory lane to examine the causes of the First World War. World War I, also known as the Great War, began in 1914 after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. His murder catapulted into a war across Europe that lasted until 1918. During the conflict, Germany, Austro-Hungary, Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire, the Central Powers, fought against Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Romania, Japan and the United States, the Allied powers. Thanks to new military technologies and the horrors of the trench warfare, World War I saw unprecedented levels of carnage and destruction, leading to millions of deaths. If you're new here, welcome. Be sure to subscribe and turn notifications so you don't miss any of our videos. The murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Tensions had been brewing throughout Europe, especially in the troubled Balkan region of Southeast Europe for years before World War I actually broke out. A number of alliances involving European powers, the Ottoman Empire, Russia and other parties had existed for years, but political instability in the Balkans, particularly Bosnia, Serbia and Herzegovina, threatened to destroy this agreement. The spark that ignited World War I was struck in Sarajevo, Bosnia, where Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was shot to death along with his wife Sophie by a 19-year-old Serbian nationalist, Gavrilo Princip, on June 28, 1914. Princip and other nationalists were struggling to end Austro-Hungarian rule over Bosnia and Herzegovina. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand set off a rapidly escalating chain of events. Austro-Hungary, like many countries around the world, blamed the Serbian government for the attack and hoped to use the incident as justification for settling the question of Serbian nationalism once and for all. Because mighty Russia supported Serbia, Austro-Hungary waited to declare war until its leaders received assurance from German leader Kaiser Wilhelm II that Germany would support their cause. Austro-Hungarian leaders feared that a Russian intervention would involve Russia's ally, France, and possibly Great Britain as well. On July 5, Kaiser Wilhelm secretly pledged his support, giving Austro-Hungary a so-called carte blanche or blank check, assurance of Germany's backing in the case of war. At 6 o'clock in the evening on July 23, 1914, nearly 1 month after the assassination of Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife by a young Serbian nationalist in Sarajevo, Bosnia, Baron Gisel von Gislingen, ambassador of the Austro-Hungarian Empire to Serbia, delivered an ultimatum to the Serbian Foreign Ministry. According to the terms of the ultimatum delivered on July 23rd, the Serbian government would have to accept an Austro-Hungarian inquiry into the assassination, notwithstanding its claim that it was already conducting its own internal investigation. Serbia was also to suppress all anti-Austrian propaganda and to take steps to root out and eliminate terrorist organizations within its borders. One such organization, the Black Hand, was believed to have aided and abetted the Archduke's killer, Gavrilo Princip, and his cohorts, providing weapons and safe passage from Belgrade to Sarajevo. The dual monarchy demanded an answer to the note within 48 hours. By that time, however, anticipating Serbian defiance, Gislingen had already packed his bags and prepared to leave the embassy. World War I begins and its progress. Convinced that Austria-Hungary was readying for war, the Serbian government ordered the Serbian army to mobilize and appealed to Russia for assistance. On July 28th, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and the tenuous peace between Europe's great powers quickly collapsed. Within a week, Russia, Belgium, France, Great Britain and Serbia had lined up against Austria-Hungary and Germany, and World War I had begun. The war quickly escalated, leading to the Western Front Plan, which according to an aggressive military strategy known as the Schlieffen Plan, named after its mastermind, German Field Marshal Alfred von Schlieffen, Germany began fighting World War I on two fronts, invading France through neutral Belgium in the west and confronting Russia in the east. On August 4, 1914, German troops crossed the border into Belgium. In the First Battle of World War I, the Germans assaulted the heavily fortified city of Liège, using the most powerful weapons in their arsenal, enormous siege cannons, to capture the city by August 15. The Germans left death and destruction in their wake as they advanced through Belgium toward France, shooting civilians and executing a Belgian priest they had accused of inciting civilian resistance. As the Germans attacked, France and Britain did not fold their arms. They rather attacked in the First Battle of the Marne. In the First Battle of the Marne, fought from September 6 to 9, 1914, French and British forces confronted the invading German army, which had by then penetrated deep into northeastern France within 30 miles of Paris. The Allied troops checked the German advance and mounted a successful counterattack, driving the Germans back to north of the Aisne River. The defeat meant the end of the German plans for a quick victory in France. Both sides dug into trenches, and the Western Front was settling for a hellish of war attrition that would last more than 3 years. Particularly long and costly battles in this campaign were fought at Verdun and the Battle of the Somme. German and French troops suffered close to 1 million casualties in the Battle of Verdun alone. On the Eastern Front of World War I, Russian forces invaded the German-held regions of East Prussia and Poland, but were stopped short by German and Austrian forces at the Battle of Tannenberg in late August 1914. Despite that victory, Russia's assault had forced Germany to move 2 corps from the Western Front to the Eastern, contributing to the German loss in the Battle of the Marne. Combined with the fierce Allied resistance in France, the ability of Russia's huge war machine to mobilize relatively quickly in the East ensured a longer, more grueling conflict, instead of the quick victory Germany had hoped to win under the Schlieffen Plan. From 1914 to 1916, Russia's army mounted several offensives on World War I's Eastern Front, but was unable to break through German lines. Defeat on the battlefield, combined with economic instability and scarcity of food and other essentials, led to mounting discontent among the bulk of Russia's population, especially the poverty-stricken workers and peasants. This increased hostility was directed towards the imperial regime of Caesar Nicholas II and his unpopular German-born wife, Alexandra. Russia's simmering instability exploded in the Russian Revolution of 1917, spearheaded by Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks, which ended Czarist rule and brought a halt to Russian participation in World War I. Russia reached an armistice with the Central Powers in early December 1917, freeing German troops to face the remaining allies on the Western Front. At the outbreak of fighting in 1914, the United States remained on the sidelines of World War I, adopting the policy of neutrality favored by President Woodrow Wilson, while continuing to engage in commerce and shipping with European countries on both sides of the conflict. Neutrality was increasing difficulty to maintain in the face of Germany's unchecked submarine aggression against neutral ships, including those carrying passengers. In 1915, Germany declared the water surrounding the British Isles to be a war zone, and German U-boats sunk several commercial and passenger vessels, including some US ships, and that was poking the bear there. Widespread protest over the sinking of US ships in May 1915 helped turn the tide of American public opinion against Germany. In February 1917, Congress passed a $250 million arms appropriations bill, intended to make the United States ready for war. Germany sunk 4 more US merchant ships the following month, and on April 2, Woodrow Wilson appeared before Congress and called for a declaration of war against Germany. As the war grew in country involvement, several battles were fought, like the Battle of Isonzo and Gallipoli campaign, as well as water and air battles. The 2 sea giants when it came to the sea were the superior British Royal Navy, followed by the Imperial German Navy. The British Navy was unchallenged, while Germany's strength on the high seas was also aided by its lethal fleet of U-boat submarines. After the Battle of Dogger Bank in January 1915 and the Battle of Jutland, the British naval superiority on the sea was cemented, and Germany could make no further attempts to break an Allied naval blockade for the remainder of the war. World War I was the first major conflict to harness the power of planes. though at the dawn of World War I, aviation was a relatively new field. During the First Battle of the Marne, information passed from pilots allowed the Allies to exploit weak spots in the German lines, helping the Allies to push Germany out of France. The first machine guns were successfully mounted on planes in June of 1912 in the United States, but were imperfect. If timed correctly, a bullet could easily destroy the propeller of the plane it came from. But improvements came with the Morane-Saulnier solution, the Anthony Fokker interrupter, and as aerial technology progressed, long-range heavy bombers like Germany's Gotha GV, first introduced in 1917, were used to strike cities like London. On July 15, 1918, German troops launched what would become the last German offensive of the war, attacking French forces joined by 85,000 American troops, as well as some of the British Expeditionary Force in the Second Battle of Marne. The Allies successfully pushed back the German offensive, and after suffering massive casualties, Germany was forced to call off a planned offensive for the north. The Second Battle of the Marne turned the tide of war decisively towards the Allies, who were able to regain much of France and Belgium in the months that followed. The African-American fighters. By the time World War I began, America did not fight alongside black armies, even though they had 4 black regiments, such as the 24th, 25th, 9th, and 10th Cavalry. Black armies were given domestic jobs, but the Europeans and France in particular fought with a black military. Blacks serving alongside white soldiers on the front lines in Europe was inconceivable to the US military. Because of backlash by 1917, the 92nd and 93rd Divisions were created, even though still trained separately and inadequately in the United States. The divisions fared differently in the war. The 92nd faced criticism for their performance in the Meuse-Argonne campaign in September 1918. Meanwhile, the 93rd Division, however, had more success. With dwindling armies, France asked America for reinforcements, and General John Pershing, commander of the American Expeditionary Forces, sent regiments in the 93rd Division, nicknamed the Harlem Hell Fighters. They fought so gallantly, with a total of 191 days on the front lines, longer than any AEF regiment. France awarded them the Croix de Guerre for their heroism. Ending the war and armistice. By the fall of 1918, the Central Powers were unraveling on all fronts. Despite the Turkish victory of Gallipoli, later defeats by invading forces and an Arab revolt that destroyed the Ottoman economy and devastated its land, and the Turks signed a treaty with the Allies in late October 1918. Austro-Hungary, dissolving from within due to growing nationalist movement among its diverse population, reached an armistice on November 4. Facing dwindling resources on the battlefield, discontent on the home front, and the surrender of its allies, Germany was finally forced to seek an armistice on November 11, 1918, ending World War I. Results of the war. World War I took the lives of more than 9 million soldiers, 21 million more were wounded, and civilian casualties numbered close to 10 million. The two nations most affected were Germany and France, each of which sent some 80% of their male populations between the ages of 15 and 49 into battle. The political disruption surrounding World War I also contributed to the fall of 4 vulnerable imperial dynasties: Germany, Austro-Hungary, Russia, and Turkey. World War I brought about massive social upheaval as millions of women entered the workforce to replace men who went to war and those who never came back. The First Global War also helped to spread one of the world's deadliest global pandemics, the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, which killed an estimated 20 to 50 million people. World War I has also been referred to as the First Modern War, as many of the technologies now associated with military conflicts like machine guns, tanks, aerial combat, and radio communications were introduced on a massive scale during World War I. The severe effects that chemical weapons such as mustard gas and phosgene had on soldiers and civilians during World War I galvanized public and military attitudes against their continued use. The Geneva Convention Agreement, signed in 1925, restricted the use of chemical and biological agents in warfare and still remains in effect today. End of war treaties. At the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, Allied leaders, stated their desire to build a post-war world that would safeguard itself against future conflicts of such devastating scale. Some helpful participants had even begun calling World War I the war to end all wars, but the Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, would not achieve that lofty goal. Saddled with war guilt, heavy reparations, and denied entrance into the League of Nations, Germany felt tricked into signing the treaty, having believed any peace would be a peace without victory, as put forward by President Wilson in his famous 14-point speech of January 1918. As the years passed, hatred of the Versailles Treaty and its authors settled into smoldering resentment in Germany that would 2 decades later be counted among the causes of World War II. There you have it, explorers. Those were the causes of World War I. Thanks for watching this video, and if you did enjoy this video, do well to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends.